What's going on, beautiful J4 family and community? I hope everyone's doing well. It's been some time since I've been on here to have a conversation solo dolo style with you, but I'm very glad to be back. I've been busy at work like many of you. For those of you joining in, welcome. Thank you guys for continuing to support the page, continuing to join me in this beautiful journey around fatherhood, conversations with sons. More recently, as you all can tell by the last four videos, I've done some stuff in the space of biracial identity, and it has been an exciting topic. I've met some new people as a result of it. Learned about some current trends that are going on in the biracial YouTube streets, and so I want to kind of continue to sort of dabble a little bit in this space because it's in two parts of significant importance to me. And you can see from the title, I said white mothers and biracial, black, white, identity development in boys. Dr. Wynn, how you doing? Number one ambassador. So glad that you're here. Would love to have your feedback if you have any. And then my man who's always been riding, and challenging, and doing his thing, beautiful human being, Hybrid Ninja. Hybrid Ninja has a page, y'all, a YouTube page that he is out there putting forth his ideas into the world, which has come from a conclusion of his life lived and experienced in the biracial space, which admittedly is different than mine. And so I love hearing the intergenerational voice that he has. So go check out his page over in YouTube called the Hybrid Ninja. So welcome, Hybrid. Dr. Went. Dr. Went is a dear friend of mine, a colleague. She does a lot of work also in the male development space, and we've had many beautiful conversations as she goes about raising her beautiful biracial children. So today I want to send a shout out to the white moms. How y'all doing? I send that out by virtue of a shout out to my own mother. I'm in this conversation because I am a biracial kid. I was born in 1968, so I have a generational perspective that reflects that particular era in terms of coming of age in the 70s and 80s. My mother's from France, so she's a European white woman, and my married to my father, who was a GI, an Air Force guy, and he identifies as Creole and black. He was born in New Orleans, and his worldview is largely shaped by Louisiana, New Orleans, and then he was raised in Gary, Indiana, which is a predominantly black city, and was a thriving black city at the time, although time has been sort of tough on Gary, but his worldview was definitely shaped. And so I lived with both my parents until I was about 16. They then got a divorce, and then I went to live exclusively with my father, and he went through what I call a black renaissance, meaning he was back into a sense of blackness in terms of dating habits, things that he participated in. And as a young child sitting at the feet, just trying to figure things out culturally, I was exposed to much of this new renaissance that he was experiencing. And not to get too much detail, you can check out other videos about my journey, particularly a video called White Mothers and Their Black Biracial Sons. But I decided going to college that I was not going to live in the proverbial gray. The biracial community was not robust, it was not large. And so I decided to lean culturally into the blackness, and that became my pathway. And I experienced it in full immersion in college spaces, largely through a black fraternity and friendships that grew out of college. And so today, to be fully transparent, biracial is my sort of racial background, but culturally, I sort of lean, move, work, love, interact, and raise my own kids from a black paradigm and perspective. All right. My work also in this space of male development, which is why I kind of focus heavily on sons. Not only do I have four sons and two daughters, but much of my work is working with black males, largely in the collegiate athletic space, and then to a lesser extent within the pro ranks. So today I'm speaking to you from those two lenses. Would welcome your comments and your feedback. And of course, please join us over there in the YouTube community with a like, a subscribe, and or a share. So today I want to leverage Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow was a psychologist, a guy named Abraham Maslow. In the 40s, he created a theory that's essentially talked about motivation, and he had 5 steps, and it has different variations, but primarily 5 steps that if a person goes through them, that they will have high desire, high drive, i.e., high motivation. If they fail at any one of these steps, that it will have negative consequences to personal drive. I truly like Maslow's hierarchy. I use it often because it gives me sequential linear indicators about how a male is developing that you can trace from childhood, adolescence, teen, and then certainly into young adulthood. And you can also identify a person's lack of motivation or a person's lack of healthy, positive esteem just as a young human being, let alone culturally, can sort of be traced back to certain developmental phases that perhaps they weren't deeply entrenched in or didn't get the lesson needed to move on to the next phase psychologically. Although age, circumstances, educational timing, and those kind of things forced them to transition out of a phase, even if they didn't get the lesson. So that's kind of what I'm going to use as a reference point to talk with us, but also with white mothers who are raising black biracial sons, either in two-parent home situations or in single-parent home situations, from my vantage point and my perspective. And again, I do not confess expertise. I simply profess life lived, and this is an important subject matter here for me, and so that's why I'm kind of exploring it. So the uh, the first step in Maslow's hierarchy is a physiological stage, right? How humans function, okay? And if y'all know anything about Maslow, he talks about those phases primarily be rooted in first things first, right? So, for example, like I like to tell people, I said, you could be at the best party in the world, you could be on the best date in the world, the food is smelling good, the ambiance is right where it needs to be, they're playing your favorite song, and you're just leaning in, right? But let's just let you get a toothache, right? Let you be on a cruise or at a wedding or at a birthday party, and you desire to be there, everything's the way it needs to be, but let you get a toothache and your teeth is just throbbing, man. That pain is immense. You would instantly stop what you're doing and you will go find relief. And he talks about first things first. That certain things have to be in place before one can move on and to consider other kinds of things that are further and further away from first things first. So in Maslow's theory, he talks about the physiological needs of human beings. This can apply to adults, it can apply to young people, but I always psychologically think about it from a family perspective, parents raising children. If you want your child to be a grown, healthy, grounded individual son and or daughter who can live an autonomous life of their own volition and accord, you have to be very mindful of these progressive steps and be very tediously oriented to how they are manifesting themselves, because each step progressively relates and results in a grown, independent being who is highly motivated. Okay, so from a family perspective, Maslow talks about sustenance. You got to have sustenance. You got to have food, water. You got to have nutrition that has to be predictable. For young families raising children, right? A lot of times, when the budget gets tight and you're shopping with coupons, you're really essentially trying to manage a budget, but your primary responsibility, especially with young children, is to ensure that they have what they need, because they are completely and totally under your reliability. They're completely dependent upon parents, adult figures, the love source to provide for them. So Maslow says, even if you're an adult, you get stranded in the woods, and you could have all the tools in the world, but your first instinct is to find food, water, and shelter, right? Something to protect you from the elements, something to protect you from external threat, things that make you sort of feel safe, which is a critical part. It's the next phase. But Maslow says basic level: food, water, shelter, and then things that you need just for healthy functionality, which is sleep. Okay, sleep. That's why when we talk to young people or adults or athletes about performance, peak performance is tied to food, water, hydration, calorie intake, nutrients, right? But also their sleeping patterns. The first thing that occurs when a person goes to uh, college, the first thing that changes is their sleeping pattern, and that can affect how they kind of manifest in terms of their peak performance. So that Maslow's kind of playing itself out. James Maps, how you doing? James asks, can you join? I'll open up the conversation here after I kind of lay the threshold for Maslow. So stay with me, brother. All right. So basically, food, water, shelter, sleep. That's the first stage in human development. Parents, we play a large part in that. The second phase is safety, right? Once you've covered your basic human functional needs, safety becomes important, right? As a child, as a young person, as a teenager, do you feel safe? Okay. Do you feel secure? Is there predictability in your house? Is there routine and ritual in your home? Do you understand kind of the cycle of go to sleep, wake up, responsibilities, lunch, go to school, dinner, whatever the case may be, that you as a child have predictability? It's where homes are unpredictable, where they're highly dysfunctional, where the volume can change at any time, where anger is overly used, not a corrective measurement, but just as a frantic way of expression. When these things come out, a person does not feel secure because they can't predict what's coming up. They can't predict the mood and the attitude of the adult figure sort of in the equation. And so they get frustrated. And one of the things that they have is that they're in the house, but they don't feel secure. They need predictability. They need to know that what is going to happen next. That helps me understand what my role is and what's next, but also I can anticipate. I have prediction. That gives me comfort. It gives me security. The other part is that they need to feel like they can get help. That if they express frustration, if they express pain, if they express anger, whatever the case may be, that they will be responded to, right? Infants will tell you this through loud vocal cries, right? But even young kids, even teenagers in their own style and in their own rhetoric will tell you when they are feeling odd, when they're feeling out of place, when they're feeling like they need a connection, some kind of support system. So safety entails not just absent threat, but also feeling prediction and comfortability in their own home. That's the second phase. The third phase, and this is critical to racial identity, okay? This is critical to racial identity because this is one of the first opportunities where a beautiful child of mixed heritage, black, white, or any kind of mixed heritage, James says he's a Native American, white, and black, is the third phase of belonging, right? Belonging starts with the family. Belonging starts in philea love. Philea love is a Greek word for love. It's different than eros, which is romantic love. Family love is philea love, right? Where you have love between parents and children. You have love between siblings, brothers and sisters, right? You experience healthy, intimate connection, laughter, joy, moments of high fun and expression. That becomes a sense of belonging, it becomes high family time. But eventually, your belongingness transcends your engagement with just family, and then you go outward and you begin to develop friendships. People that parents bring into the home, typically friends of theirs with children of a similar age set. Bring them in the environment. That becomes opportunities for social interaction, testing the waters, play among people that parents approve of, and you begin to develop sort of friends that become possibly future friends or friends that are just kind of consistent and current with the particular age set. And then this becomes a way in which you begin to test the waters, particularly among social circles. And depending on the age, you're dealing with gender dynamics, you're dealing with size dynamics, you're dealing with vocabulary dynamics, and you're dealing in some instances with racialized dynamics. It is when the beautiful babies begin to interact with friends that they begin to experience the nuances of othering, of difference, of things that are not as familiar because they're an extension of their immediate family and exposure, but now they're going outward into the world under parental advising and guiding eyes, and they're beginning to touch and experience and engage the world. All right. I have my pro biracial page. If you're interested in the upliftment of biracial people, then subscribe to my channel for daily updates on biracial advocacy. That's hybrid promoting himself on my page. I feel you, brother. All right. The other phase of belonging is where they leave the house to begin formal systems of institution, formal systems that are largely rooted in institutions. For us, that's typically known as school systems. Okay, maybe they did some pre-K work, maybe they did Montessori kind of stuff, but now they're beginning to go into a K-12 environment, whether it's public or private. But now they are going into the public. They're going into society with a purpose of being educated, and they're going to get that. But then there's the whole social, cultural, social, anthropological nuance that goes when young people of the same age set begin to gather and cluster, absent parental observation, absent sibling comfort and affirmation, and now they are in structures. They're in societal kinds of nuances, and this is a part of belonging, right? In the K-6 environment, that's largely selected by parents. Parents still have a heavy influence in that, but as the babies get a little bit older and they're beginning to have some sense of autonomy, which typically begins in middle school, they'll begin to make their own choices. In high school, they're moving towards independence. But one of the themes of this conversation, beautiful families, particularly white mothers, you and your partner are in control of what your beautiful seeds are exposed to for almost the first third of their young life prior to turning 21 or 18. Okay? All right. Hybrid, James Maps, we would refer to that as MGM, multi-generational mix. Okay. Both my parents are biracial, light skin, mixed race. All right, we in here popping. I like it. Now, so established belonging simply means to be present, but belonging is also an outcome, right? Just because you're among people doesn't necessarily translate that you feel community, that you feel acceptance, that you feel belonging. It is this notion of feeling accepted, feeling like you have a place, feeling like you're seen and that you contribute and you're adding value. That is then the precursor to esteem. Okay. But esteem typically is going to be developed both in a family structure. The parents likely are going to have high praise and high encouragement for their babies. And that's one level of feeling good about yourself. But the next level of feeling dynamic and good about yourself is how do you engage and how are you received by your peer group, by your age set, likely a very diverse kind of age set, depending on where you grew up and where you went to school. So esteem is created in relationships through challenges where you go to play, you're playing and, all of a sudden it's recess time and you're playing basketball, right? Can you dribble? Can you shoot? Can you make a layup, right? Kids that can do that a little bit better, they'll kind of get more currency and status in that space. You go over to the four square and you got a little game over there and you get a little status in the four square. Maybe you in the chess club and you can move the pawns and know when to pull out the queen and the horses and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's where you kind of get currency. But groups all give us an opportunity to fail, to also stand up and dust ourselves off, to stand on our own feet, to hold our own in conversation or in activity or in schoolyard tussles, whatever the case may be. And it also gives us a chance to be successful, right? And with success comes praise, peer praise in its own language and its own style. But those are where kids, unbeknownst to themselves, subconsciously or maybe outrightly they know, is where they begin to feel good about themselves because they have received praise from their peer group. All right. This is very unique for all people of the age set, but it also is very unique in homogenous settings where people are of the same racial background, typically the same socioeconomic status. But it is also very unique for biracial children because it is not often that they will play and be in groups that are exclusively biracial. And so they're then in the navigation of something racialized where a homogenous environment might not necessarily have that dynamic in reality. And white mothers, parents, whatever the case may be, this is something that you have to be mindful of and certainly understand because your baby's esteem, your child's capacity to feel good about themselves has everything to do with the environments that they're in. And you have to select environments where they can age appropriately. Don't shelter them, don't shun them, don't coddle them, but you have to put them in spaces where they can be successful, right? And that is a lot of what parenting is do has to do. And this doesn't have to be stated to you, biracial, interracial marriages that produce biracial kids. Your child's identity inevitably will have to examine how they see themselves culturally. How they see themselves culturally, particularly from birth to middle school, is largely under the domain and management of mama and daddy and or whoever the single parent might be. All right. What does James say? I think we need more light-skinned parents or biracial parents to talk with biracial kids. Absolutely. 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 All right. And so following physiological needs, safety, belonging, and esteem, and assuming that went well, or if it didn't go well, it correlates to the final phase, the tip of the pyramid, which is self actualization. And according to Maslow, that is the desire to become the most one can be, right? It's a driving factor. It makes you goal oriented, it makes you task completion, it makes you have the self gumption, the self fortitude to say, man, I conquered that, I managed that, I did that. What's next? Bring it on, right? All children need this opportunity, and you can look at your child. Are they motivated? Are they recluse? Are they sort of afraid of their own shadow kind of dynamic? That is correlated to how they progress through Maslow's hierarchy in this one theory around self-motivation. As parents, it is our ultimate goal to get our beautiful seeds to the tip of the pyramid, self-actualization, by an age set where they can leave the proverbial nest, go out into the broader society, be relevant to it, learn from it, make their way in it, and leave their mark. All right. So that's the foundation for the 5 steps of Maslow's hierarchy. I'm going to pause there and see these boxes moving. Appreciate y'all. Dr. Went, I'd be interested in your thoughts. All right. Let me get back to the comments. All right, let's see. Scottish Zula 611. I ended up being a chameleon, assimilating to whatever the majority culture was. Read code switching, but with culture. All right, beautiful. Yeah, code switching. We've talked about that, but that's often all people do it to some extent, even if they're in monoracial kind of groups. But biracial kids are become almost masters at it because they just have a dynamic of just being raised by 2 love sources from different heritages. They have to navigate between not only families but also outward social environments. Hybrid Ninja, we need more biracial members. My calling and purpose is to be just that. Beautiful. Again, Hybrid Ninja has started a web page called Hybrid Ninja. Y'all go over there and check him out. I have a light-skinned wife and daughter. All right, James, I feel you. Okay, so now a critical component for biracial identity development is the belonging and esteem phase. I've underscored that. So here's a question that I invite all of us to sort of think about, but particularly in this case, moms, white mothers that I'm conversing with. What do you want your child to be exposed to? What do you want your beautiful child to be exposed to that will influence their sense of self and understanding and what it is to be a biracial person, right? That is our responsibility, right? My kids appear to be biracial. Percentagely, they're more black than I am, but they do appear to be biracial. And I'm aware of that. I'm cognitive of that. I'm mindful of how they'll move in sort of public spaces. And so my wife and I made some very intentional decisions about what we were going to expose them to during ages where their minds were just empty vessels. Cognitively, they're geniuses, as all children are. But who's responsible for putting messages or exposures or influences into their head? That is us as the parents. And so, what do you want your child to be exposed to that will influence their sense of self and understanding of what it is to be a biracial person? That is undeniable. One parent might be one heritage, one parent might be of another heritage. They came together in expressions of love and produced a child, but they produced something that is not their particular heritage makeup. They produced a child that inherited the DNA and cultural nuances of 2 parents. They are a biracial child. They are different than you were as a monolithic kind of person. All right. So what influences do you want them to have? Because there's a couple of patterns that they might sort of fall into, right? Racially, they're biracial, but culturally, what do you want them to become, right? This is your decision to make at a certain time. Now, eventually, they'll grow up and through their own experiences, they'll answer the question for themselves. But in the beginning, the influencer is mama and or daddy or mama. And they're biracial. But what do you want them to be culturally? In my experience, I chose to raise my children in a black sort of aesthetic reality, nuance kind of circle and sphere. Okay. Now, as you can probably see here in the comments, there's a lot of input and an assertion for a new identity, not a new identity, but I guess a reimmersion or a heightened declaration because of the times and experiences of the beautiful people that they're recommending a distinct biracial identity, right? And that is also an option. They can be racially biracial, and they can also then just be biracial. Maybe that's something you let them kind of be ambiguously racial, right? They're neither staunched in a blackness, neither staunched in a whiteness. They're just biracial, living a beautiful life. You could do something like that, right? There's also they could be racially biracial, or they could be biracial with a healthy understanding of both the love source's heritage. These are questions that y'all will need to sort of grapple with as a beautiful family raising children, and particularly in this case, biracial children who are going to go out into the world, and how they see themselves across a number of variables to include cultural identity is critical to how they move, how they see themselves, and how they join with like-minded individuals that become their kin circle, their social circles, in way in which they find continued opportunities for group involvement, spaces for dialogue, spaces for love, spaces to sort of continue to build and grow out social circles that then lead themselves to relationships, love, and eventually children. All right, so you got choices here. Okay. Dr. Wynn says self-actualization is difficult to both children and adults. Yes, I am intentional to expose my kids to minority Black spaces to help them grow their biracial identity and let them decide how they identify. All right. So Dr. Wynn is taking the pathway of exposure, but then at the same time letting the babies identify when and how they're ready, knowing that they'll probably go through various phases of identity development, but ultimately from exposure, which is the theme of what I'm sharing, they'll come and land in their own space. Beautiful. All right. Everybody in my family look white, but we're actually mixed with three things like everybody. Okay. James is ready to get in here. Hybrids representing, culturally biracial, we're here. Do you think we should have our own country one day and nation? Okay, well, that's Golden Sphere. Make sure you know about the Golden Sphere, James. That's what they're talking about. I don't know if they're talking about one country, but they're certainly talking about a solidarity. Scottish Zulu. Never knew my dad. Sorry to hear that, brother. Sorry to hear that. Grew up with an Hispanic stepfather. I'm European and African. Beautiful. The only mixed person, even though most of that family is Mexican American, is not seen as such compared to African American. Okay. All right. I'm going to open up the I am possible I will make it for us. I'm assuming the nation. Okay. Okay. The If you have questions, this will be a good time to put them in here. I'm seeing the comments. That's beautiful. If you're seeing any value in this, please head over to J4 Conversations. Give us a subscribe, a like, tell some folks about it. There's over 70 videos there. Just a few of them are biracially related. A lot of it has to do with father themes. And if you are a father, welcome, check it out. Or if you are one day going to be a father and see value in it, that's also a space just to hear some perspective on that. All right. So there's a lot of ways in which you can influence the identity beginning of your beautiful biracial child. Okay. The means by which you can provide exposure, intentional exposure, is really in a few kind of sectors. One is in the schools that you choose. the schools that you choose. In the state where I live, you can travel. You don't have to go to a school that's in your neighborhood. You can pick a school. There's private schools, there's public schools, there's small public schools, and you can get a sense of the diversity, the demographic, the academic achievements. But where you send your child is going to be the place where they spend a significant amount of their time away from the home. And these are going to be spaces that are basically diverse. If you choose a diverse space, they might be more homogenous if that's something you choose. But you can influence what your child is exposed to by what schools you intentionally choose to. And you want to expose them to positive spaces reflecting the cultural communities represented in their heritage. I'm recommending that you pick positive spaces that represent the communities that are at least reflective of the dual or tri or multi heritages that they share, that they have within them, so that they can see it with some frequency. They can have proximity to these beautiful communities as a part of their belonging in spaces where they'll develop esteem, largely through group interaction and youthful banter and play. If your school system is not necessarily reflecting in any complexity that the dual or multi-heritage that they have, then I would highly encourage you to supplement that through co-curricular kinds of activities, like sports is a way to do it. That was one way in which I made sure my children were exposed to African American beautiful youth through sports. Even though their school was diverse, it wasn't largely African American diverse. And so through sports, through club, through football, through basketball, things that they enjoyed, they then had an opportunity to engage that particular cultural community, which was certainly an important part of their mother and I's intentionality. So sport. Not all young people will enjoy sports, though. So there's other things, other opportunities that they can engage. You know, I have a son that's an engineer. He kind of went with Odyssey of the Mind, robotics. He likes things, and so that's how he kind of pathway. So we made sure through school and through opportunities in the community, he was doing engineer related kind of stuff. I have another son that's in theater. He's an actor, opera singer, and so we pathwayed him into the arts. He took a lot of acting classes, and that's where he kind of found his community and a chance to, to feel a sense of belonging and to learn the lessons of esteem out of that. Then there's also male organizations that have youth programs. You can find those in non-secular entities. You can find those in fraternities and sororities. But if you want your child to have an African American experience around positive, well-achieved men who are, by virtue of membership, want to be a part of continual cultural uplift, and they have youth programs to help sort of mentor, introduce, and sort of reflect leadership in certain cultural themes, then those are spaces as well. And then also, and finally, and then we'll open it up here, self-learning, right? What do you intentionally expose your beautiful seeds to? What books are you purchasing for birthdays? What gifts are you giving for the holidays, however you celebrate them? Are there opportunities for them to see themselves, again, align with whatever you see value, to see themselves, if they're biracial, to see other biracial positive images? If you want them to have a cultural sort of exposure, and so are they seeing positive Black kinds of figures? If you want them to have a balanced association with whiteness, how are you sort of representing that? These are things that you do with your gifts. These are things that you do with where you take them, what you expose them to, TV shows that you watch, right? All of these ways are just providing this tapestry of exposure opportunities where a young biracial kid who is in a duality can also then sort of passively, intentionally be exposed, and then to begin to formulate their own sense of self, to formulate their own sense of ideals, to kind of move through the world with an honoring of both love sources in a healthy kind of way. And then at some point of their own age and through their own experiences and life lived with groups, with representations from other kind of racial communities, they'll make their own decision as to which identity they want to assert and sort of land in and move forward. So self-learning, what are you exposing them to? All right. So those are five things: school intentionality, where you send them, what kind of sport opportunities are you providing for them that might introduce them to communities that represent their beautiful heritages, two or more. opportunities that aren't sport related, but also are curricular and hobby and interest kind of rooted. And then also male organizations to provide exposure to your sons, especially moms. If you're single parents raising a son, the dad is involved at whatever level and sort of whatever volume of presence. Not getting into that, but if you feel you don't have a sufficient amount of male balance to who you are in terms of your maternal rearing, then how do you get them in front of some other male figures? One way to do that is through male organizations because they have structure, they have purpose, often aligned with their national agendas, and they often have youth-based programs that are periodic, episodic, where your son can go in there and get some male examples, some male pouring in. All right. And then finally, self-learning, teaching them the beauty of self-education, the excitement when one can sort of get in a zone of learning, and you can do that from a cultural perspective, but you can do it from biracial, black, white, whatever the mixed heritage is. But then within that, they'll find what they're excited about, but they'll discover that within the broader category of culture. So if they're interested in archery, they'll find an example of archery or heroes or sheroes within archery, but it also comes from the culture. If their hobby and passion is technology, they can find that within the space of culture. So these are just ways of being highly intentional in what you expose your babies to. But from a Maslow's perspective, the two critical pillars are belonging and esteem. It is difficult for parents to predict esteem, but what you can control, what you have greater predictability of to have a positive impact on how one sees themselves, is to be intentional about where you send them to, where you introduce them to, where you release them to when you let them out of your sort of nurturing love clutch and you put them into the broader society. Parents, you absolutely can control what those environments are. And they need to be positive spaces that reflect the beauty and the heritage that is reflected in both their parents. That way they can see it, they can experience it, they can normalize it. And when they have these experiences, hopefully it'll lend itself into positive esteem. All right. Having said that, we're going to go to the chats here a little bit and then I will open it up. There's some faces in here that I do not know. So we'll see where that goes. But I do want to open it up. There is the link to StreamYard. Let me kind of go here to a couple of. All right. I would like to interview in the future going over the 9 criteria. I think it would be an excellent discussion. Hybrid is talking about just some musings I did when I first discovered that there were biracial young people who were more than just frustrated with maybe their acceptance into a black monolith, that they had such experiences that they were, feeling it was time to develop their own racial identity. I have to admit, I was completely taken aback by that. I did not know that existed, certainly with any kind of fervor and momentum. And so hybrid represents that particular community and let me know about something called the Golden Sphere. And so I began to check it out, and the beautiful young people over there are, they're pushing back a little bit on some assumptions and stereotypes and bad experiences that they perceive from, darker skinned black folk upon light skinned folks. And they're essentially saying enough is enough. And they're creating a space in which they're, I believe, at the emerging phase of, trying to figure that particular part out. But the question of, what would it take to even make the question reasonable in my world? If you declare biracial, that doesn't require any kind of sanction, appointment, or anointment. You just simply do as you wish. But I wanted to think about it from a broader societal perspective, that what would it take for the question to even make sense, at least in my mind. And so I came up with 9 criteria, not 9 criteria, but 9 things that I think would kind of need to be in place, several of which are, before the question even might take on sort of a national momentum, where biracial folks, hopefully from still a loving dynamic within the sort of black cultural mother, will begin to sort of assert identity in different kind of ways. So that's what he's talking about. So Howard, yeah, let's just talk offline as to when you want to do something like that. All right. James, do you think it's possible if we make our own language too? I'm working on that actually. I found out that it was ancient language made by biracials or mixed by people. Okay. Well, you on another level there, James. All right. Exposure is essential. Greek life, minority male groups. Please know that as a white parent, they may be embarrassed at some time to show up with their white mom. That is okay. Give them space. Okay. Dr. Wynn is actually talking about an episode. Well, I don't know if Dr. Wynn's talking about an episode, but in an episode, we talked about with another friend of mine. He was born in 70, I was born in 68, that we had moments of embarrassment, right? And that was because in our youthful coming of age process, we were just trying to manage identity dynamics and didn't want any sort of pronunciation of our biracialness, although they could look at us and see we were biracial. But in our youthful, immaturity around that, we were just trying not to have that punctuated in any way. And so there were moments, in myself included, where you had angst when you were in sort of black spaces and then your maternal figure kind of came in there. Looking back on that hindsight, and perhaps an argument for the biracial assertion is that in my era, we did not necessarily exalt or publicly declare our white mothers. That was typically something that was just understood, not thought about, because the pathway into membership or a youthful grouping for biracials at that time, or at least how I interpreted it, was into a blackness, and that was sort of the dominant goal. But in many ways, we silenced the presence and part of us, the love source of our white mothers. That is certainly a regret and a legitimate argument for the biracial movement today about not having to do that, right? Rejecting that no, they come from both love sources, and both love sources deserve to be symbolically represented in life lived. All right. Always provide books, mentors, legacies of positive figures. And due to that, I had an honest conversation with them. Right. Well, thank you, Dr. Wynn. I'm glad my man and my, sharing of our youthful moments of uh, uncertainty became a good conversation for you with your son. Sorry for typos. No, no. All right, James. Let me see your face so I can make sure we're dealing with a human being. And I want to thank y'all for coming in and for chiming in. I appreciate that. Appreciate all the comments. Seem like y'all having a good time over there in the chat. Appreciate you coming in. If you have a question, comment, disagreement, perspective, feel free to put that in the chat. Or if you want to come up as well. James, when you come up, I'm going to ask you kind of, where you're from, what's your biracial identity, and what's on your mind. Okay, James, I did not see you. Let me see you one more time. I'm seeing a white box. James, I got to see you, brother. I didn't see you. So as we're doing that, thank you, AJ. Appreciate you as always, Dr. Went. Truly appreciate that. Truly appreciate that. Uh, okay, I see something. James, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I really can't
All
show my
right.
face real quick because my hair.
You couldn't what?
I couldn't show my face real quick because my hair. I'm washing my hair.
Okay, no problem, no problem. Where you? What's your biracial makeup?
I'm Native American, mixed with Native American, white. I'm mainly white, and I have black in me. So I got three races.
Beautiful. How would you identify racially?
People say mainly Native American. It's kind of white, so I would say both.
Both. Okay.
White. I
All
would
right. So
just say
racial.
white and I would say white and black.
That's how you
Everybody in my
identify
family,
racial.
yeah,
Do you make a distinction in identity between racial and cultural? Would you identify differently culturally?
yeah. I'm mainly like in the black community, but I'm trying to make a mixed community.
You're trying to make the mixed community.
Yeah,
All right. Are you familiar with the golden sphere?
yes. I'm trying to make videos, but I'm trying to edit the videos and stuff like that. Talk about issues, have live streams like everybody else.
Yeah, YouTube can be a wonderful format. It certainly has democratized voices. Typically before you had to have larger media outlets representing voices, and you had to have significant money to do it in any large kind of way. But YouTube is, relatively affordable, and for those who have ideals and perspectives in the world, that's a part of the democratization. So good luck in that process with your channel. What's your question, brother?
Um, do you think that do you think that mixed people been around for a long time?
Oh yeah,
No,
yeah, I'm sure.
I'm talking about for the like BC era because I heard that we've been around since the 15 BC era. We even have our own land and languages that were lost and stuff like that.
Well, brother, I'm gonna have to admit ignorance on that one. I certainly don't know 15 BC, but I could imagine if you have people who are at whatever point we became different aesthetically, where you saw racial differences, phenotype differences, hair, whatever the case may be, whenever you had two groups come across each other that spent any significant time around each other, eventually love and curiosity will manifest itself. So I imagine as early as people kind of getting together in groups of some relative differences, that there was sort of inmating and dating, and mixed kids were produced. I absolutely have no doubt on that. I think anthropology and human hormones would determine that.
I also think that mixed people was procreating with one another and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think you can look across the world and see all the hues of people to suggest that interracial dating and producing biracial multi children is a part of the broader human society, no doubt.
Oh yeah.
hmm we got Hybrid in the house. Hybrid, how you doing, brother?
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Thank you for letting me join the panel. Yeah, and I kind
Yeah.
of like to your recent point what you just stated about the kind of broader society with the mixed communities. Obviously in America with the white and the Native American, but also you see that in Australia as well with their kind of Aboriginal population. They've kind of interbred with the dominant white society. And then, as a historical reference, you're aware, of course, of the Bering Strait theory,
Yeah.
where thereby the Asians crossed the sheet of ice from Alaska into America. People proclaim that they kind of interbred with some of the native population here. So this type of thing has been happening for, millennia. Some could speculate, but I wanted to just ask you real briefly, what's your analysis on the recent NBA draft? This is what I see as the future in a lot of cases. What's your analysis on that? The heavy presence of biracial males.
Before I answer that, did you have any comment or feedback on the essence of my show? Kind of Maslow's hierarchy, particularly influencing around belonging and esteem, and parents' opportunity there to shape their children's exposure. Any thoughts, feedback there?
Yeah, no, it was a magnificent expose. I really appreciate it. You're very, eloquent in your presentation. I really appreciate. Obviously, you're a parent. I'm 33. I'm a bachelor, so I'm not a parent. But what you said kind of really hit a nerve with me. I remember you mentioned, kind of as a child, I'd say maybe in high school or before
hmm
that, there would be times where I would kind of be ashamed of my white mother to bring her
Yeah.
around certain spaces,
Yeah.
and that's a shame. That's a shame that we are put in that situation at times to feel that. So I like that you kind of pointed that out because I identified with that. It's happened to me. So my generation. So I hope that the future generations don't really have to, do that.
Well,
No,
also I got something. Do you think that what do you think? What are like biracial? Okay, do you identify light skinned parents as biracial and stuff like that? Like if their child the same skin tone and stuff like that.
uh,
Yeah, I mean that's. Sorry, go ahead.
James, who's your question directed to?
Both.
Okay, let's hold off on that one. Let's deal with the NBA first, and then we'll come back to that, James. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm assuming, however, you're talking about the fact that, at least in the social media community, I have not looked at the actual data set, that there was uh, a higher proportionality of light skinned uh, young brothers in the draft compared to perhaps previous drafts. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, sir, but just to be specific, not light skinned, but biracial, specifically white mother, black father was a huge dynamic. So I just wanted your kind of take on that. That's a trend that we're going to be seeing more of. So they're going to be entering more into our space. And yeah, we're evolving essentially.
Yeah, yeah. So in previous episodes, we talk about. In fact, one of the criteria would be uh, a significant mass of people who were born in interracial marriages, right? And what is the likeliness of that to continue? And with the exception of the Asian American other mix, which is declining from earlier data sets, all other mixed marriages, whether they be person of color, white, or person of color, that's exponentially growing to where it's 38.8 million right now, roughly 10% of the population, something along those lines. So yes, the children, biracial children, are increasingly becoming significant numbers. So as they grow, they're going to show up in places that they historically hadn't been, right? And then assuming black father, white mother, the sport of basketball tends to be dominated by black male figures, and that can play itself out all the way where, for example, one of my recommendations was to get your children into sports. All my kids played basketball, and had they had the talent, they might have progressed on up to the league. And you might have seen me and my old self hybrid sitting there with my kids. I would have enjoyed that. But
Do you
I
have a
just
daughter?
one sec, James. So yeah, as we become more in numbers, or the biracial community becomes more in numbers, they're going to show up in places where they historically haven't been. And some of the first spaces that might occur is spaces that have been historically dominated by black individuals, because oftentimes, as was in my case, your biracial kid tracks sort of upon the black pathway, especially if their father is black. And so they're going to show up in black spaces initially, but they'll expand outward and begin to show up in perhaps non-traditional spaces as well. I think it's a function of numbers, and also a function of priorities of parents, if that makes sense. Yes, I do have daughters, James. Hybrid, do you have a follow-up related to that before we go to James' question?
Oh no, you can move on. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, yeah. So James, your question was, are are the parents of biracial children biracial?
Are the no, well, also, like, is the children also biracial too? If both of the parents is biracial, like both of the parents are half black, half white, both.
Yeah, if both parents are biracial themselves and they produce a child, that child would be multiracial. I would think, just in terms of.
Well, sorry, sir. Just a clarification. I think the gentleman asked, put a comment on that in the chat, and I specifically mentioned to the gentleman we would refer to that as MGM, which is multi generationally mixed. So you have the perfect example of Steph Curry and Aisha Curry. Both of them have that background. Well, actually, Steph Curry's both of his parents are both biracial, so he's MGM. So I mean, just to get into specifics. So yeah, I mean, multiracial, specifically more dominant European and African. So yeah, that's two races specifically. If that answers your question, James.
Oh yeah, and that was me who said that.
Yeah, no, the hybrid broke that down much better than I, because as I'm discovering, there's a vocabulary, there's acronyms that are being defined and clarifying and layering, that are coming from folks that are advocating for a biracial identity, or maybe the academics. But yeah, that was certainly a more concise number, articulation of that. Toenail breaker, you're welcome to come up. The StreamYard link is, I think, about 4 or 5 posts right above you. Yeah, just show me yourself in the box, and then we'll put you up, and then you can use your avatar. I
Yeah,
noticed.
well, I was talking about the language. Yeah, it was an ancient language that was made by biracial and mixed people. I heard, and I actually got the book, and I can teach everybody, like mostly the golden people, biracial mixed people, all of us in this community. And I got another question. Do you think we should all have tribes when we make our own country and nation?
James, that's not even on my radar, brother. I don't know if Hybrid wants to get on that. He's welcome to answer that.
Yeah, that's kind of outside of my view as well. That's pretty extreme. I mean, we're essentially a nation within a nation, a minority within a minority at the moment, but our numbers are growing. In the future, we will be the majority. You know, the famous National Geographic cover talking about what America predominantly will look like around 2050 or so, just roughly. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
as far as nationhood status, that is definitely something that I would want to pursue, but it's not really in my view at the current moment. I just more so want to galvanize and organize with other golden people, and we can start from there. And yeah, but how old are you, sir? You sound like you're kind of younger, if you don't mind me asking.
oh, I'm 24.
Yeah, I kind of thought you were early 20s for sure. You seem like you have a lot of energy, a lot of ambition as well. But yeah, thanks for joining us.
I have a daughter.
James, we appreciate your thought process there. J4 conversation wouldn't necessarily be helpful you in nation building and language dissemination, but definitely maybe the Golden Sphere has some thoughts and threads on that. But I appreciate you, James.
But
Tone
also
up.
maybe like the next generation maybe can make it their first official language when I get done with it. Modernizing it and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, you're not speaking far from other groups who have, chosen to self-identify, to be self-determined. They've talked about land, they've talked about language. So indigenous communities have talked about language reclamation and affirmation. So yeah, it's interesting. It's beyond me, James. James, as I mentioned before, in my coming of age process as a biracial kid, white mother, black father, I chose to get out of the proverbial gray and to land into a blackness. And so all of my choices, decisions since then and to continue today are very much moving towards a black identity dynamic, of which I believe is more than just skin color, but also about work. What does one do to attempt to improve the cultural community from which they come from? That's been
Yeah,
advantageous for me, right?
mainly my people, yeah.
Yeah.
My family side, yeah, mainly my people like my first ancestry, they were white and black.
Beautiful, James. I'm gonna get on. I'm gonna go on. Thank you for joining me. I'm gonna drop you down. All right, James.
Okay.
All right, brother. Toenail Breaker, how you doing, brother? First of all, I want to say welcome. I think you've commented on some other posts. You might even been the gentleman that kind of educated me on the 1790 census. I'm not quite sure if that's exact, but thank you so much for coming on, brother. What's your biracial? What's your racial identity, if I may ask?
Anyhow, thank you for the invite. Really appreciate it. My racial background is white Anglo-Saxon and Afro-Caribbean. My dad is well, I guess you guys would say as Black Caribbean from the British Islands that eventually migrated over to the U.S. To the U.S. Caribbean islands, which is St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. Those particular three islands, if people are not familiar with them, that's the U.S. Caribbean. So they are United States citizens. But the difference is they can't vote unless you actually live in the actual in you actually live in the United States. My
Mm.
mom is from the United States. She is white Anglo-Saxon. I am whom is a direct descendant of the people of Jamestown, meaning the first English group that came to Virginia within the United States, whom the foundation of this entire country is based off of their culture. So I'm a direct descendant of that particular group. Although there has been a disagreement, I I do I have no shame of identifying with this particular group. Although they did some very tyranny acts within this country towards minority groups. But
You're
these
talking about the
people,
Jamestown. You're talking about the Jamestown thread there.
Anglo-Saxon Protestants throughout the whole history of the United States, they were the very first ones that basically coined being white.
Uh,
Greeks were not white, Italians were not white, Irish was never considered white. White back then was not based on just solidly a phenotype group, but was based on culture. a cultural group, and that's what it was based on. And a lot of people today within and today within the 20 in this century, a lot of people don't understand who was actually considered white and how it evolved. It's almost on the same line with who was originally called black and how that evolved through political influences and so on, moving out through the throughout American history.
So no, Brandon, let
Um,
me interject. Let me interject right quick. I'm just trying to follow a format here. It seems like you have some thoughts and questions, but so you biracially, you shared that wonderful heritage background. Race, culturally, how do you identify?
I racially identify as Euro-Afric,
Okay, and then
but culturally I'm white.
culturally, you're white. Okay,
Yes.
the did you get a chance to see the show, the premise of my show about the impact of Maslow's hierarchy on exposing biracial children? Did you have a chance to see that at all?
I can't really. I browsed over a couple of your stuff, try to stay up to date with it, but I would just say no, I haven't because I have not been able to stay focused because of my schedule in the background. So I've been popping in and out, and sometimes I can't view your entire videos on it. So I would respectfully decline and say no. I did not review everything.
No, I meant the show. This show.
Oh,
The,
this
the
show. No, from the
yeah.
beginning. I'm just popping in, and I just
Oh,
heard a
okay.
couple of the comments that were
Okay.
being made, and I just wanted to come in and give some input, perhaps some help on regards to it. But a bit of my background, though, just to let you guys know, um, I was born in a black country. I was not born in the United States. Well, the U.S. Caribbean is considered to be in itself because it has its own flag, it has its own constitution. It's considered to be its own country in a particular sense, but it's property of the United States. So the majority of in the Caribbean that I grew up around was 70 something percent black. So I grew up in a black atmosphere, but
Hmm.
that black atmosphere, which is very close to Africans, West Africa, which is very close and has a lot of West Central African heritage, which is also too mixed with European heritage, etc. I
Right.
never grew up with that identity that I was black. It was something that was never infused in me. If anything, in a black society, even though if I'm in Africa or among Africans, etc., I would always be seen as being seen someone more to the white spectrum, not
Hmm.
as black. Of
Okay.
course, here in the United States is reverse, thanks to Anglo-Saxons who actually created that idea, because this is something that didn't exist in other, like say for instance, let's look at other European colonies. They didn't have these particular ideas or one drop rules, and etc. Some of the
Right.
things that you elaborated on are things, the ideas were things that were introduced by white supremacy groups or influences that formed particular thoughts or process or perceptions. Like, say, for instance, if you look black or if you don't, is based on cultural perception. But those cultural perceptions were influenced by outside sources, and they can't say themselves were actually, well, is it African or is it authentically black to see that? Because if you want to know what phenotype, what is black and what is not, you can always go and follow West Central African standards of what blackness is. I know
Hmm.
what black culture is. I know when someone identifies. Now, what makes a lot more sense of it is when you say that you're black culturally. That makes a lot more sense than saying black racially.
Are you directing that question towards me?
Well, it's a couple of the stuff that you did mention, and for anyone else that basically follows along the same line. I understand where you're coming from because some of your descriptions you describe as a cultural assimilation rather than a racial. Because if you were to ask me, someone who is also too mixed, I have a what was called a white mom and a black dad.
Okay.
If you saw my picture, so if I
Hmm.
was to look at you down, it would never come to my mind. I would think you were probably Spanish or something. I
Hmm.
would never
Hmm.
think that you were identified as black. It's because I grew up in a black society that's we know what black is in regards to that, but then again I could understand where you're coming from in regards to it, and there should be a distinction made between ethnic association or cultural association in
Yeah,
identifying, and
yeah, yeah.
racial association identifying.
Yeah, let me jump in. You're absolutely right. In fact, in one of the videos, I joke, not jokingly, but when you're immersed in sort of life as I kind of see it and move through it. Sometimes when I'm giving a speech or talking, and and my hand hits out, there's this moment of wow, you're pretty light skinned, dude. But yeah, there's a time, and it wasn't until this conversation, this beautiful conversation, to where, to me, I even decided to grapple or make the distinction between birth identity, racial, and cultural. To me, it just was all blended, right? I just didn't make the distinction. In fact, it wasn't until coming up with those 9 things that I think would need to be in place for the question of a biracial standalone entity to be legitimate, just my musings, that I really grappled with it. Hybrid was, kind of instrumental in some of the earlier conversations. So yes, racially, I do consider myself biracial. Now, if I got a U.S. census, I don't know if I would break my pattern of checking black. That would still be a moment of vacillation. But culturally, I do consider myself black. So yes, a great distinction there. Great distinction there, James. James, did you have a question or anything there? Other question? Not James, but I'm sorry, Toenail Breaker.
Oh, as to elaborating also too on the part, well, what if both of your parents are both biracial? So that is uh, that's kind of ambiguous, because remember, the word biracial is it's a term that means your parents are come from two different racial groups,
Right.
and it does not define black, white, or Asian, or Arab, or anything of the such. It doesn't do that. Although I am not a person that I don't use it, because I use it depending on the context, depending on who I'm
Yeah,
around. I
yeah,
would
yeah.
use it for simplicity.
Hmm.
But as for describing myself, definitely I would say Euro-Afric, which is a or Euro-Afric, which is a if anyone has studied anthropology, that term, it is an actual term that it's an actual anthropological term for us, for those of us who are black and white mixed, which is Euro-Afric or Eurafric. So I would usually, in the census report, this is how I would more than likely describe myself, if I have to go in and describe. In the latest census report, you are able to check more than one box, and then you can give a description. So when you check white, you can give a description of what do you mean by
Right,
white,
right, right,
and
right.
then black. What do you mean by black? And I was able to give those descriptions, or my affiliation with these particular groups.
Yeah, I think
So
that's the advancement of the census, right? The sophistication of it, where it is, it's trying to recognize through rightful protest, critique, and feedback from communities who didn't rightfully feel represented. The consensus is sort of catching up with the times and the diversity that is the community. But brother, I love your articulation. I just want to make sure, if you have a question or something that we could vibe on. You're absolutely right in the designation and the specificity by which you're wanting to identify yourself. Much respect for that, brother. Much respect for that. But any question or anything along those lines, Tonell?
it wasn't a question; it was an answer to a question that basically came up. And the answer to the question: if two parents are basically are
Oh,
biracial, and what would that make their child? Well, this is where the problem comes in with the biracial term.
mm,
So if you don't have an actual definite terminology for somebody who is both, for someone who is black and white mix, and then if they have a partner that's also too black and white, and they have kids, what are you going to call them? Biracial as well too? That's where the twist comes from. So that's why it's important to have a definite identity in the beginning. So then if you do have kids, then you're able to basically identify those kids by the same. So that's
yeah.
one of the flaws about the part of using the term biracial too loosely and too frequently. But anyhow, I just wanted to elaborate on that particular part. That's it.
No, that's powerful. What I'm hearing is an exacting, right? A very being very specific and clear, using proper terminology, so that in biracial or multiracialness, of which when you look outward, just as you rightfully assess when in looking at me, you might not know. But if I'm astute to the vocabulary and I could say I'm this racially, at least it would give some sense of clarifying dynamics that could be beneficial down the road in some kind of way. But again, that speaks to the generational uniqueness and nuance. For me, it was just light skin biracial was all used interchangeably, and there was certainly no other acronyms that further, in a concise way, talked about particular heritage mixes. So powerful stuff, man. Powerful stuff. That's why I enjoy the conversation. I'm learning. Hybrid, I saw you kind of unmuted there for a minute. Any last thoughts, comments, or questions, Hybrid, as we begin to wrap? And then Toenail, I'll come back to you.
No, I'm just gonna say thank you for letting me join up here, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks.
All right, brother. Good to see you again. Appreciate you. Toenail, any last thoughts, man? Appreciate your engagement. Clearly,
Yeah,
you're a
yeah.
reflective.
Just one more other thing. So my question to you: when, from what you know, perhaps something I could probably not just as you see that you and I are around the same age. So I'm Gen X.
Okay.
So we're around the same age. So there's a couple of things I've heard you saying before in the past that we could definitely relate it to because we're around the same age.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is this: when, from your knowledge, when did mixed race or biracials, black and white mix, when did they become black in American history?
Well, I think upon birth, and I think your question it might tie into the mulatto designation. To me, in my orientation to identity, and I'm not an historian by a long stretch, is that you have biracial kids that exist for millennial, but in the very unique institution of chattel enslavement in antebellum South, you have this phenomena of property through birth, and so it incentivizes power structures to impregnate black women and to produce children, right? And because the child came from a black mother's womb and a white father's sperm, despite how it happened, the fact that it came from a black mother's womb makes her or him or her, in my worldview, black. Okay. Now to parse it out in the specificity by which I picked up in your conversation, they literally are biracial, right? Or mulatto is the term in that regard. But because the relationship by which the birth was in the chattel enslavement going forward circumstance was whiteness producing property, and the biracial person was certainly considered property, and so in a arguably problematic way, to me, they fell within the black frame. They fell within the black family. And so going forward, as more and more biracials were born, not out of the chattel of enslavement, precedent had been set that membership was in a macro collective blackness kind of going forward. And then you had situations where it was no longer as so many white males producing mulatto kids or biracial kids, but as laws changed and social experiments kind of immerse themselves during periods of integration in significantly more numbers. People move into urban centers and meet and mingle, school, colleges. You begin to see the inverse, where it is men of color having children with white women, not exclusively, and producing biracial, multiracial children. And even though the initial assignment was from a white sperm bank, now it's coming from a blackness, but yet the precedent of biracial people being merged and identified with blackness was established, and that was one that I certainly kind of just continued on in my own thinking.
Okay, that's fair enough. Um, that's fair enough. As but I wouldn't. That would be somewhat of a partial of the story because from that's like would be partial of the story because
Mhm.
Europeans originally before they came here, they went by they went by the father as
Mhm.
establishing basically right and inheritance.
Right.
So, but since they started um, procreating with African women, and before race-based slavery was started to become a thing. Remember now, they also too did this with Irish people that weren't considered white,
Hmm.
and they also too had the same ownership over the children that were produced. That's why if there are some old pictures, you'll see where they had some if you look back, you would probably also to find some pictures that you saw people of European phenotype also to work, and not nowhere to the extent as you would see what they did with Africans.
You're
But then
talking
there
in
were
America, right? In
yes, in
America?
America, yes,
Yeah.
in America, yeah,
Mhm.
in America. That same analogy also to apply to Irish, because some of the men basically some of the men also to procreated with some of their indentured servants that were subject to servitude.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, it was not black did not originally equate to being slave. It became something synonymous as it culturally progressed with the change of laws.
Hmm.
Now, and what they did is that the Anglo-Saxons also to changed from going by the father to the race and status, to determining the child. The race and status of the child was based on the race and the status of the mother,
Yeah.
in order to get out of that loophole.
Right.
So then now you have white women that were basically having was procreating with some of the black slaves,
Hmm.
and which was bound by the law for them to basically to be free. And if you looked in a lot of the European language back at that time, they would mention basically free mulattoes and free blacks back at those particular times. But anyhow, moving it up fast, when everything became consolidated, because it consolidated into one, is after during the Jim Crow. What was the stamp upon that was the Racial Integrity Act of 1924,
Hmm.
when they did away with the mulatto category, and now they threw everyone basically up under as black.
Right. Right.
So, so
Tony, let me stop you there because you're dropping a lot of science and knowledge. But let's you and me kind of stay in your earlier phase. Remember your thought, and then I'll give it back to you. So we have a comment here from Fran Brown. Fran, how are you? The Irish were indentured servants. They weren't under the system of chattel slavery at Toenail Breaker. I think Toenail kind of alluded to that on the back end. But let's conversate about that for a moment. Not your question, but we talk about, and again, you're talking preciseness, and as an intellectual, you ought to, but sociological and the inheritor of identity formation. Whenever I could think about it, maybe 75, I would have been 8 years old. As I was thinking about identity, one of the things I did examine, particularly earlier migrants, whether Italian, Jewish, or Irish, and not to negate the fact that they probably were here before in some indentured servitude, that further strengthened the black membership question for me of biracialness was the fact that over generations, an aesthetically appearing European or a person from Ireland could change their circumstances to seek positive opportunity in the American society. And we see that they did that through name change, religious was more private, it faced outwardly different, accent changing, clothing choices, things that distinguishingly identified them as ethnic. They were able to mitigate that and then to progressively find themselves to find entry into business, commerce, and education. One of the things that further entrenched me in a Black curiosity and ultimately membership was that even as Blacks attempted to change their proverbial circumstances, as all other groups did who were facing some kind of societal heat or some kind of societal threat, they could never change their phenotype. And so, to your question about the Jamestown lineage and sort of having to struggle with that, right? When I was thinking about biracialness from my whiteness and blackness, and I had to pick a side, I wanted to choose a side that had been resilient in the face of oppression and not necessarily the sort of the group that was the initiator of oppression. And so that further entrenched me to not navigate percentage and acronym and title, but where did I want to be? Where did I want to be a part of? And where did I want to put my life membership and one opportunity to work on behalf of cultural uplift? In part was navigated by the inevitability that no matter how much hue you had in you, you were of the black diasporic, and that was something that you couldn't navigate out of. And I had no desire to do that. So I wanted to be a part of a collective growth that was fighting against, that historical narrative. Make any sense there, Tonell?
No, I totally agree. I totally agree to where you're coming from. It's with and why I am culturally white till today is because of the opposite of what you experienced.
Okay.
When I came to the United States, my like I said, I was not imbued and infused with white, black, or race. I didn't learn about race until after I came to the United States. That's the crazy thing. Okay.
Yeah. It meant something different in your upbringing. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah, correct. It was completely something. And my experience with the black community was not a good experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I found myself more in comfort or in support in white communities,
Okay.
in which I have always been living in from since when I first came here, I was attracted to the hip hop
Hmm.
scene, etc. When I
Hmm.
came here, but coming
Okay.
here, different from what they've been advertising as it shows as being diverse and just diverse, etc.
Hmm.
That was not my experience based on what the advertisement you would see in TV or movies, etc. So just to put that out,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was good, but that was not my experience when I came here. And then slowly but surely, I was kind of like pushed out because of the
Mm.
aggression. And then I moved over. I moved over to basically a community that was I more gravitated towards, that was more
Hmm.
accepting of me and was
Hmm.
more supportive of me.
Hmm.
So in my experience was a little bit different, but also too is having the Caribbean perception or
Yeah.
that in me.
Yeah.
I never grew up with the concept of being infused or being told that I was black.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was only recognized as basically being mixed race. That's about it. But yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think it's going to be different for everybody who is mixed race, depending on where they gravitate, depending on who the people that they associate with, etc. They're rearing up,
Right.
and which will determine which way that they will gravitate towards.
You're absolutely right, Tonell. How one moves through the world is influenced by how they're exposed to it, initially by parents. To go back to my earlier theme around Maslow, and parents have to be intentional about what they expose their babies to. But eventually, we inherit autonomy and seedings of independence, and then we look outward to see where we are accepted, where we find belongingness, which is the third phase of Maslow, which then equates to our sense of esteem. If we had one message in reality when we were developing that provided negative experiences within a certain cultural group, we're going to feel some kind of way and move some kind of way. If we were embraced by a monolithic culture, then as I was, maybe you would have a different kind of landing place. But I don't begrudge anybody's landing place, brother. Who we are is largely influenced by where we come from and who we are around. Um, my premise in this biracial space is for self exploration, but also and not to drop any new science. I just don't want the assertion of a biracial distinctive identity to come at a failure or a distrust or an anti-ness towards blackness. If biracial eventually is going to assert itself as its own identity, I hope that it does it as a cultural handoff from a long legacy of cultural glue and membership that bonded light-skinned people and darker-skinned people through their sort of storied history here in the U.S. If it's time for the group to become its own group because of numbers and other kind of factors, beautiful, beautiful. I just hope the break is not a contemporary manifestation of a new form of white supremacy. I really hope not. Tonell, thank you, brother. All right, I think Tonell has. Oh,
I'm sorry. It's a pleasure. I forgot I had myself on mute. It's a pleasure, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
thank you, brother, and appreciate your comments, feedback, and for challenging me in earlier concepts. Thank you so much. Beautiful family. Hey, this has been a joy. It's been a great conversation. James, I want to thank you for coming up. I'm wrapping up. I know you had some ideas you wanted to explore. I just don't have that background, brother, to even be able to offer anything of significant value to you. Hybrid Ninja, salute to you, brother. That he has a page that he's launching. He's called the Pro Biracial Space. I find hybrid to be open to conversation and dialogue. If you want to explore that or get a sense of what's on his mind, which is representative of the golden sphere, hey, go check it out. Toenail Breaker, appreciate you, brother. I love your specificity and your story. Hopefully, you guys will join me in another conversation. If you've seen value in this beautiful family, please give us a subscribe. That helps us grow. A like, comment, share with someone that's kind of in this biracial journey, especially a young person. And to the thrust of the opening title, White Mothers, Biracial Black White Development of Boys. All right. Moms, if you want to have some offline conversations with someone who's not confessing expertise in biracial, but certainly life lived, and someone that works in the development of young men, particularly an emphasis on black males, to include biracial uh, uh, black males, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email up if that helps in any way. I would love to offer value to raising healthy, grounded, beautiful sons and daughters. All right, beautiful family. Thank you guys so much. On behalf of J4 Conversations, great live stream. Thank you, Fran Brown. Please check out some of the other sites. And last word is to Toenail Breaker. James, Irish, Greek, and Italian people were never considered white. White was a being of Anglo-Saxon descent exclusively. Other European groups did not become white until after assimilation in the U.S. That last sentence I agree with. Thank you so much, Toenail Breaker. On behalf of J4 Conversations, truly appreciate you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We out.